Hi, welcome to another edition of This Issue. My guest this time is Doug Rawlings, who's with Maine Veterans for Peace. Doug, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bruce.
Glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
Tell us about yourself, where you live, what you do for a living.
Well, right now I'm happy to say I'm retired, but before that I worked at the University of Maine at Farmington for 27 years, ran a lot of programs for them. And previous to that I ran 2 Bath Shoe Factory outlets for 6 years and then taught high school prior to that for 6 years. Right now I live in Chesterville, which is a suburb of Mount Vernon, which is a suburb of Farmington. So I'm back in the Willy Walks.
All right. You were also one of the original founders of Veterans for Peace, which has become a national organization.
Correct, yeah.
Briefly share some of that history about the founding and what VFP has become.
Sure. It started in the early 80s. We up in Farmington have a group called Western Maine Peace Action Workshop, and we happened to invite Jerry Genesio and Judy Genesio to talk about their work in Nicaragua with the Witnesses for Peace. And at the end of his talk, Jerry said, he said, I'm looking to form a group of mostly of veterans who are interested in peace. And I said, sign me up. So it took us about 2 years to get it all together, but 6 of us finally in July 1985 signed off on a contract and got our charter going, and off we went. And we started with that, and we now up to 130 chapters around the United States, 2 international chapters, 1 in Vietnam, 1 in London. About 4,000 members. We have NGO status, United Nations. We've done a lot of work internationally. And our goal is very simple. We want to abolish war, and our strategies are to be nonviolent in doing so.
Why do you want to abolish war?
Well, for our children's sake, for one thing, and many of us who have been to war realize how devastating it is. And as far as we can see, for the safety of the planet, we've got to stop this immediately. So.
Now, you're a Vietnam veteran.
Correct.
You were in the Army?
Yes. Right.
And you went to Vietnam. And when you went there to the war, did you support the war or were you opposed to it? This is shameful to say, this was in 1968. I was drafted out of graduate school down at Ohio State. And I have to say that I was ambivalent about the war, even though I'd seen my buddies in high school come back from Nam really screwed up. And I knew about it. But I just didn't muster the courage to say, no, I'm not going. And I allowed myself to be sucked into it, so much to my regret. And would you say you became a peace activist there or because of it? Or?
Yeah, sure. It just changed my life entirely, right? I realized all the horrible things we were doing to people. And supposedly in the name of democracy, just turned me right around, radicalized me a great deal. Even though I'm not a radical, I wouldn't pretend to be a radical, but it certainly changed my worldview very much. Yeah.
Can you say a bit more about that? What happened to you?
Well, I was in the Central Highlands of Vietnam, which is mostly peasants and rice farming and whatnot, and little villages, and I saw the brutality that we were imposing upon the Vietnamese people there, and I saw it as a systematic way of looking at going through the world, and I just thought, I cannot be part of this kind of system anymore. And I originally was going to go back to stateside and become a lawyer and work for Eastman Kodak and all that kind of stuff, and I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't work for these people. So.
I've heard you speak recently about the government wanting to rewrite the history of Vietnam.
Right.
Can you say a word about that?
Right. Well, the Obama administration, I think, has already put $15 million into a website where they call it a commemoration of the Vietnam War. And what they're trying to do is mythologize it and sanitize it and turn it into a noble enterprise where, we did these wonderful things and fought against the communists. And if you go to the Department of Defense's website about the commemoration thing, you can see some of the stuff that they're spewing out right now. And they're doing all kinds of celebrations. There's a big celebration in Texas, I think next month, about recognizing Vietnam veterans and all that stuff. And the impulse behind it, I think, is the way they're trying to make it look is that they're trying to finally give Vietnam veterans their due, right? They recognize the work and stuff like that. But what we see it as doing is setting up future wars. They're saying if we can get through, that's what they call the Vietnam syndrome, if we can get rid of that, then we can justify other wars in the Ukraine, for example, or wherever we pick. So we can sort of put Vietnam behind us.
So those of us who were involved in the Vietnam War are saying there's no way in hell we're going to let that happen. We're going to tell the truth. So we mounted what we call a full disclosure campaign. And we're countering their timelines, we're bringing in speakers, we're having people write, and we've put together our own website as well, which I encourage people to go to.
These days, we see a lot of tension in the world as the U.S. pivots, moves 60% of its military forces into the Asia Pacific to control China. What's your take on this?
It's incredibly arrogant, right? And it's just another example of these imperial designs that our governments have about what the rest of the world. I mean, to divide the world up into sort of 6, units, if you will, and then send forces in these different places, is, to me, it's incredibly wasteful, money-wise, obviously. But it's also really naive into thinking that we can impose our will on the rest of the world. So I see it as, especially in the area, in the Asian area, as incredibly dangerous a place to be playing our little games. So.
At the same time, the U.S. and expanding NATO are encircling Russia. NATO has moved into Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, right on the Russian border. It's moved into Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, really violating the promise at the time that the Berlin Wall fell.
Right.
Gorbachev was the premier of the former Soviet Union, and U.S. Secretary of State Jim Baker promised Gorbachev that NATO would not expand eastward if Gorbachev and the Soviet Union would agree to the unification of Germany, both East and West Germany. Gorbachev agreed, took the promise as a deal that NATO wouldn't expand, and then when Clinton became president, NATO began expanding in a steroidal fashion. It's been going on ever since. And then just recently, we see the U.S. fully involved in toppling the government of Ukraine. The Victoria Nuland State Department tape that was saying, we want this person.
We're going to midwife this thing.
And F the EU who wanted somebody else, and all that stuff is going on. But we're talking now about the U.S. moving NATO into Ukraine and also Georgia, which also is a bordering country along Russia's Caspian Sea area region. What do you think about this whole surrounding of Russia as we're doing to China today?
But, I mean, just obviously from your lead into this question, you know a heck of a lot more about it than I do. But, speaking as a citizen and, as a member of Veterans for Peace, I'm appalled by this stuff. And one of the benefits of being in Veterans for Peace is I get to rub shoulders with people like Ray McGovern. Okay, now, Ray McGovern worked as a CIA analyst for 50 years, 7 presidents in Washington, D.C. He's now retired from that and formed an organization. They call themselves, I think, Intelligent Professionals for Sanity, Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. And he's written a couple of pieces about this thing, and he said, this just indicates how absurd these neocons really are. Their imperial designs, this whole idea that the United States is an empire. They're admitting that. They're saying that. Only we're a good empire, right? They've got this notion that we can move anywhere we want, and the people will welcome us, and we're doing all these good things. And he says, this is so absurd. It's ridiculous for us to even think of going that close to Russia. And, as he says, aren't you aware of the fact, that Putin has nuclear weapons, right? He has a capability of really, going at it here. And all this sort of what Washington seems to think is sort of harmless saber rattling and rhetoric is incredibly dangerous, right? And we don't know what could happen from that. He makes reference to how World War I started, right? Just a small little incident that brought in all of the countries. He said, that's what we're looking at. And so, again, I would echo what he is saying. That's how incredibly naive it is for the American people to trust governments that are going to lead us into these kind of situations. And he makes reference to Nuland, too, Assistant Secretary of European Affairs, or whatever. As a professional who he knows these people, he said, she's a joke. She's incredible. To have gone on an open phone line and had that conversation that got picked up about how they were going to midwife, the Ukrainian parliament and stuff like that. He said, that just indicates to you the level of sophistication of these people. And finally, and I think he's right. He said, Putin is no saint, no question about that. But to offend them is taking a major player out of the international scene. He helped us, to some extent, anyways, get out of Syria. Pull back the reins in Syria. He could do the same thing with Iran. All right, so instead of antagonizing him, we should in fact be trying to work with him, diplomatically in the world. So.
Well, in fact, the Washington Post just very recently reported a poll that said 56% of the American people said no, don't get involved in this Ukraine situation.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because the mainstream media is all about demonizing Russia and making Russia an enemy and everything else. But somehow the American people seem to be able to sort through it all and recognize what you're saying is being true, that this is terribly provocative and dangerous.
Well, I mean, it's worked with people like yourselves and other people who won't buy the mainstream media's interpretation of it. In fact, it was you, I think, that sent out something that gave me the initial warning about who these people are who overthrew the Kiev government. They're neo-Nazis, right? And the people in that area, in the Ukraine, if you look at the history of World War II, they have a very, very strong memory of what the Nazis did to them. And they don't want these characters running that whole show. And yet they're our allies in this whole situation.
Yeah, there were, when Hitler swept through Ukraine as he was invading Soviet Union during World War II, where 27 million Soviets were killed, Soviet citizens were killed by Hitler. There were a significant number of Ukrainian Nazis that joined with Hitler.
Right.
And so the Russians have a long memory about those traitors. They were traitors, right? And because they collaborated with Hitler. And so now these are the people, to a certain extent, that the United States is supporting in this so-called Ukrainian revolution. I saw a videotape of this same Victoria Nuland, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, speaking last December in Washington, reporting on one of her trips. And on the stage, on one side was an ExxonMobil logo, and on the other side was a Chevron logo. And she was reporting that we've spent $5 billion on this Ukrainian project, and everything's going well. It's all on schedule. And so clearly, the American people have funded this whole thing. They were funding the riots, the mobilization of the citizens, and the whole works.
And they're promising another $1 billion, right? Didn't Obama just recently say we're going to give you guys another $1 billion? $1 billion that perhaps could be used in the United States, to build our infrastructure and give us Medicare and
maybe
all
it
kinds
could be
of good
used
stuff.
down at USM as the students are
that's right,
in revolt over the cutbacks of faculty and programs there.
Right.
Let's move on.
Sure.
On Saturday, April 12th, Maine Veterans for Peace will hold a rally in Bath from 10 a.m. to noon during the christening of the Navy's new $4 billion stealth destroyer. Why is VFP concerned about that?
Well, of course, as citizens of Maine, for us to, as a citizen, for me to think that off the shores of this beautiful countryside that we've got, this coastline, we are crafting a ship that's designed to kill other human beings is really abhorrent to me. To think that this is going to be added yet as another vehicle to encircle China, coming right out of our state to go around, also drives me crazy, right? I really don't think it's absurd to say that we could convert that place, BIW, into making hospital ships as opposed to, say, destroyers. And if there was the USS Clara Barton, being christened and stuff like that, we would be there as Maine citizens welcoming it 100%. I really do think, Mainers are strong, moral human beings, right? Who, when they become more and more aware of the damage that we're doing to the rest of the world through that kind of operation down there, we change it. So I'm hoping April 12th will change some minds again, wake people up to what's really going on here.
One of the things we're going to do that day on April 12th is play the
1994
Labor Day rally at BIW when President Bill Clinton, Senator George Mitchell, Representative Tom Andrews, the local S6 president of the union, and the International Association, International Machinists Union Association president George Corpius at that time, all call for the conversion and diversification of Bath Iron Works.
Right.
So we're going to play that audio that we got from C-SPAN. We're going to play that at the rally there on April 12th to really make the point that for years the workers have been lobbying and pleading for a conversion. And in fact, it's only going to happen when the workers and the community together demand that the politicians step forward and help make it happen.
And from an economics perspective, the manufacture of these war material is less labor intensive than other manufacturing processes. I mean, if we would be getting more jobs and more money if we switched over, that made the economic conversion into peacetime. Windmills, hospital ships, you name it, trains. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we could do. And retooling places like BIW, as we retooled during World War II, for example, can be done. It can be done effectively and efficiently if we have the will to do it, right?
That's right.
And I would think if I were working at BIW, I would be really, really freaked out by virtually, it seems like every 2 years, they're dependent upon some military contract for jobs. And if that contract doesn't come through, you're out of job, right? If I'm a welder at BIW and suddenly they decide that they're going to make the ships down in Mississippi or Connecticut instead of here, we're screwed, right? So now, if we had something, if we were making windmills or hospital ships and something like that, we'd be much less dependent upon that kind of instability.
In fact, studies show that if they were building rail systems, as you mentioned, at BIW, they would double the number of jobs because it's true, as you said, that military production is capital intensive, meaning it eats up a lot of money and doesn't give as many jobs. But every other kind of production, except for military, is labor intensive. You get more jobs, more bang for the buck, so to speak.
And you think of the irony of we're creating these war machines to protect supplies of oil, but we're using all of this oil to build these machines and send them around. It's that sort of recycling of the absurdity of it that drives us crazy, right? So if we were in fact making wind machines or whatever, we'd be protecting the environment as well as giving people jobs.
And isn't right now that with the coming reality of climate change, isn't that what we need to be doing in a big way?
I mean, even Angus King, who came back from his trip to Arctic, of course, he says stuff like, God, it's amazing up there. Everything's shrinking and it's horrible and that kind of stuff. And then he turns around and says, but it's a wonderful opportunity, right, for the Northwest Passage, and we can drill for oil there and all that kind of stuff. Again, you'd think these people would see the absurdity of these kinds of
this
statements.
relates to the Russia thing, because when you look at the map, you look at the Arctic Circle, you see that Russia borders more of the Arctic than any other country.
That's right.
And it's my contention, this is one of the reasons why the United States is demonizing Russia so much right now and surrounding them militarily, is because we're getting ready for the day where we have severe military confrontation over who controls the Arctic for drilling. And it's ExxonMobil and Chevron that are heavily invested in making sure they control it. So I think we've got to connect those dots and see that we're playing a fool's game here.
There's a word that people in polite society don't like to use in this country, and it's fascism, right? And if my understanding of fascism, it happens when the military and the corporate world collude. Yeah, exactly. Marry, and they start working. Is that not your idea of what fascism is?
That was Mussolini's definition. Yeah. And isn't that what we have today?
It's, people don't like to say that kind of thing. Like they don't want to talk about the empire and the imperial designs of the United States. But, I mean,
I also, these days, have resorted to calling our government the oligarchy.
Yeah.
Oligarchy means control of the many by the few. And oligarchy seems to fit. Getting back to April 12th, later that evening, after the BIW rally, there's going to be a public forum sponsored again by Veterans for Peace at the New Unitarian Church in Brunswick at 7 o'clock. Things are going to start with a potluck supper at 6. Would you talk about that event?
Sure. Well, first of all, I would really like to say from Veterans for Peace, I send a huge thank you to the Unitarian Universalist Church for allowing us to use their space for this kind of event. And to me, that's the kind of community stuff that makes this country a special place and will change this world, is that kind of participation. April 12th, our media guru, Dud Hendrick, has rightfully called it a doubleheader. And what he says is, essentially that you've got two events happening on this one particular day. You've got that the BIW vigil, and then we have the potluck stuff. And we brought. It's going to be exciting. And one other thing, and let me then. Well, I have my notes here. I want to do justice to the people that are actually speaking. But this is our 6th annual Veterans for Peace event, educational event. Previously, we've done 5 things on PTSD, and now we're doing it on the pivot. So we're bringing Joseph Gerson from the Quakers, his Peace and Economic Security Program. He'll discuss how to actually demilitarize the Pacific as opposed to militarize it. We've got Boston College graduate student Fumi Inoue, who will bring her expertise in Japan and United States relations, along with her work with atomic bomb survivors, to talk about her work and how we can perhaps influence our governments to change. We've got MIT researcher and former staff member of the United States House Armed Services Committee, Subrata Gushrai, who will discuss the impact of the United States foreign policy on his native India. And finally, we'll have a radio show host from the Asia Pacific Forum, Hyun Lee, who will talk about the work of trying to unify the Korean Peninsula. So we see it as a really exciting evening, sponsored by a whole bunch of people, a bunch of groups. I could list those if you wish. You want me to spend the time to do that or not? Okay. But in any event,
I would say PeaceWorks. PeaceWorks. The Mid-Coast Peace
Veterans
Group.
for Peace, Smiling
Very
Trees,
much.
Disarmament Farm. Yeah, just there's like 6 or 7 groups that are sponsoring this. It's wonderful.
So so we invite the public to come to that. That's Saturday, April 12th at 7 o'clock at the New Unitarian Church. It'll be fun to see the church that's been rebuilt across from the library in Brunswick. Right. Well, we're almost out of time. We're getting close. How are we ever going to end war, Doug, as long as our local communities are so reliant on the production of jobs? You've already talked a bit about this, about the idea of conversion, but say something else about that.
It's a matter of will, and it's a matter of looking at the world from a moral perspective as opposed to a strategic perspective. I think too often we get entrapped by these so-called experts who will talk to us about the economic advantages of this, that, and everything else, and we put aside the moral consequences of our actions. And I think when people really sit down and understand what war is all about, as many of us in Veterans for Peace have firsthand knowledge of, they would say there's no way we can possibly ever do that again. So what we have to do is then look at the strands of militarism in this country and how war production and preparation for war and all that kind of stuff has taken over our country. And we've got to change that. We've got to move that stuff out of there. And we can do it. People oftentimes will say, well, Veterans for Peace vision of abolishing war is so naive. And I say, it's naive to think that war will make this world a better place. That's the naivete. So we've got work ahead of us, but it's good people like yourself and others that will make it happen.
And like you, you're a poet, and we have a few minutes left. Could you please? Why don't you read one to start, and we'll check the time and see what we have left.
Right. Yeah, actually, I have a book coming out, so I hope by May 1st that it'll be out there. But
a book of poetry.
Book of poetry, collection of poems. Over 40 years, mostly political poetry. Here's one I wrote called Guantanamo Poem, January 2014, and I've written it for the Veterans Peace Action Team. And the Veterans Peace Action Teams are members of Veterans for Peace who are willing to commit civil disobedience and be arrested to carry forth the good work of Veterans for Peace. They're a very special group of people. So this is called Guantanamo Poem, January 2014, Egypt Pond, Maine, which is where I live, right by Egypt Pond. It is legal, you know. The state even grants permits. Of course, there are limits, and you do need the landowner's permission. Here's how he does it up in Maine. He cuts a good-sized sapling, then he augers a hole through the ice, sticks the steel trap onto one end, and lowers it to the pond floor. The beaver swims over out of curiosity, I suppose, and ends up with a leg open to the bone. Her efforts to break free are futile. She's pinned down, drowns. They have lungs, you know. Same in Guantanamo. Tie the poor bastards down, let them feel what it's like to drown. Do it again and again. What to do? Up here, I strap on skates, take to the pond under the cover of the stars, find the saplings and shake them up and down. Maybe spring the traps, I don't know. You guys are brave brothers and sisters. Wrap yourself in prison orange, fast for days on end, gather at the White House fence, maybe change some minds, we just don't know. But I won't quit, and neither will you. After all of us, no matter who we are, we all need each other to be free, for all of us, to breathe.
Very nice. You got one more short one?
Sure, how to prevent nuclear war.
There you go.
There you go. It starts with a proverb, Native American proverb. It says, we have not inherited the earth from our ancestors, we have borrowed it from our descendants. How to prevent nuclear war. Give to each president, each prime minister, each admiral, each general an acorn. Tell them the planet will never see it again. Tell them not to think about it. Rather, each morning before thoughts crowd in, tell them to feel it. Feel its roots stretching into the earth, to feel it aching toward the sun, to feel it breathing into the wind. Tell them to feel it swinging with the laughter of their children's children.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Bruce.
How about 1 minute closing statement to the listeners before we go off the air?
Oh, put me on the spot with
Put
that.
you on the
right?
spot.
Right. I guess I would, I'm now 67 years old, and I'm on the other side of the mountain, and I've taught young people for years and years and years. And I would just like to say that I have tremendous faith in the possibilities of young people to create a peaceful world. I often refer to the Stephen Jay Gould's biological thing called punctuated disequilibrium, where he says evolution was not this gradual process. It happened in spurts, right? And when the Occupy movement happened, when the young people took to the streets and said, we can't do this anymore, there was that spurt. They were put down a little bit, now there's another spurt. So have faith. I think the world's going to be a better place.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce.
Thanks for coming on the
Sure.
show.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching another edition of This Issue. Until next time, good luck to you all, and please get organized.